Hello and welcome back. We're back. Everyone's back. Kim's had a real tough time at Fiber Connect, and so she changed her name to Casey and changed her hair. This is Connect This, and I'm Chris Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Kim will be joining us as soon as she's available in a minute. We'll introduce Casey last, and I'll go right to Travis. Travis Carter from USI Fiber, welcome to the show.
Good day, my friend. To pre-warn you, Mr. Dawson and I are a little under the weather today, but we will try to be our charismatic selves.
Well, I appreciate. So, you feel like you're compelled to come not feeling great because I'm doing fewer and fewer shows now?
Yeah, just this beautiful weather here, this heat, I think maybe got to me. I'm not used to this. I'm a polar. And it's hot here.
Yeah. We're approaching what DC deals with every day, Casey, just so you know. It's not pretty.
It's ridiculous.
You have my sympathy.
Doug, down in Asheville, North Carolina, with CCG Consulting. I hope it is much nicer there.
We've had 14 straight days of rain, so it's been soggy. Yes, today has not rained yet. We're hoping, though,
Well, it's good for avoiding allergies, at least. That's what I've found. Doug was not at Fiber Connect. Kim is. We're probably going to talk about that in a bit. But we brought on an expert on all things legal and beyond for broadband. Casey Lyde, who is, if you're not familiar, I've been doing the newsletter. If you don't get the Keller and Heckman newsletter, then you're doing something wrong if you're watching this show. But Casey meticulously puts that together himself. So welcome to the show, Casey.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
The starting, we have a peekaboo thing with a picture we just threw in at the last second. So why don't we run?
Do we want to wait? Do we want to wait for Kim for the peekaboo?
We'll wait for Kim. Okay, we'll wait for Kim.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead, Travis.
How do we get the newsletter? Can you send a link?
Yeah, we'll put a link in the chat in a second, but I think it's the Casey might be able to just describe it
for that in the chat here. Yeah, you can get to it from our website, and if you ever come across a version of it, there's a link at the bottom of it, and it's called the KH Broadband Digest, not to be confused with other similar newsletters. Let me pull up a link, and I'll put it in the chat here. And Chris, on your side, maybe you can make it available to others.
And I 100% recommend you read it, Travis. It's great.
I will. I hope I get approved. That's the thing.
I still have a filter. That goes into it's the baller list for me. So for back when it was baller herbs, before Casey and Sean were partners even.
Yeah, we've been doing it for 15 years or so, something like that.
Yeah. We got Kim in the back room. She's gonna be hopping. There she is. Welcome, Kim.
Hello. I'm here.
So
I'm like
would you have a good lunch? I didn't see you afterwards.
I did have a good lunch yesterday. It was good. I think I ate a BLT, but I've been a little busy, Chris. I've been a little busy. No pressure.
I'm going to ask you about the vibe in a second, but first I wanted to say that I popped into Fiber Connect yesterday just to spend some time with Billy Ray, who is a legend of municipal broadband. Ran the first municipal broadband network. He built it at a young age. Him and a bunch of great folks working in Glasgow, Kentucky, figured it out. There's a bunch of great stories that come out of that. We had done a video about them a while back, and maybe we'll resurface that. But Jim Ballard and I went down to talk with him about it, and it just reminded me of the crazy. Do you know that there was a lawsuit in the 80s about who owned the wiring inside a single family home? I think we might have even talked about this one other time.
Wow.
But yeah, there was the cable company that Comcast had bought, Telescripts, asserted ownership of all of the wiring inside people's homes, not just MDUs. And it went to a jury trial. That's how they figured it out. So pretty cool.
Wow. The sexy stuff you talk about at lunch compared to what I talk about at lunch, Chris Mitchell.
We also talked about electric rate design quite a bit, and the role of information with the sine wave of the demand. So, if you want some demand response afterwards in the green room, I'm there for you.
Did you talk about Woodrow Wilson on that sexy lunch of yours too?
Not you too. All right, we're ready for the vibe check. What was the vibe at Fiber Connect? 5,000 people crowded in Nashville for the Fiber Broadband Association.
I actually think it was a really positive vibe. I think there was a lot of energy in the room. I think there's a lot of confusion, like with anybody, of what's happening in this industry right now. But I actually think it was a really good conference with some great people and some great discussions and a lot of newbies in this space, but a lot of people who've been here for a long time. But I think that there's a lot of hope and a little bit of questions of what the future really holds. I mean, as we've all seen, I mean, with the administrations and what's going to happen on this election, I think it's a little bit of a wait and see game right now for a lot of people.
So we've talked about how a lot of people don't seem to understand how long it's going to take to get the money out the door. So I feel like there could have been like a crushing despondency in the room, but you didn't feel that at all.
No, not at all. I think that everybody understands that BEAD is taking longer than we thought it would, but I think it's more of people just want answers. And I think, but I do think there is some, I would say it was an overall good vibe, but I think there is a little bit of concern of what happens with this money and what happens with the election and what happens if the administration changes with the money. But I don't think there's any scaring. Like, I don't think people are scared right now. I think it's more of like, can we just get some stuff started and go? Like, we've waited long enough is more of the vibe.
Yeah. Okay. Doug, Casey, or Travis, any other thoughts on either being around 5,000 people or the mood of this event?
I have a side comment. Jim Ballard and I went to see Billy Ray about 25 years ago together one day. So we had a very nice meeting back then too. He's a very interesting guy. So
that was right when he was leaving the circuit, but he spent like 10 years traveling the world, basically talking about municipal broadband.
I thought you were only 26, Doug. So you were 1 year old when that trip happened.
I was a newbie.
Okay. Figured.
Okay.
Travis?
Am I the only one that doesn't know who Billy Ray is? I thought he sang Icky Heart or something.
Billy Ray.
That's Billy Ray Cyrus.
Oh, okay.
Billy Ray ran an electric utility, municipal electric utility in Glasgow, Kentucky from like 1982 until I want to say like 2020 or so, 2021. Okay. He, oddly enough, first of all, he's just a terrific person. You've heard him before, Travis, because I've interviewed him a few times. But he spent his lifetime trying to get the electric industry to be more intelligent about how it was managing its plant and investments with information networks, and ultimately got run out of town by people who were scaremongering that their bills were going to go up if they used that technology under a new rate that they designed, when most of the people who ran them out of town would have seen their bills fall by between 25 and 50%. And so it's one of those things in which someone spends a lifetime of public service and then gets crucified for it.
Okay.
I'd point out his last name is Ray. It's not Billy
I think his middle
Ray,
name is actually Joel, and so I think he decided to go with Billy Ray rather than Billy Joel Ray.
I like.
Are you serious, or is that a joke? Or,
his email, I believe, is William Joel Ray, and so I believe he wouldn't have just inserted that. So I mean, the man is musically linked one way or another. So, yes. All right, we're going to move on to T-Mobile and Metronet.
No, Peekaboo.
Oh, yeah, you're right. All right, who's running the show? Right, let's do the Peekaboo. All right, we got this from a friend of the show. What is going on here?
Somebody who doesn't know how to neatly attach their wires, mostly.
I'm guessing it's 20 years of management.
Yeah.
Well,
Travis, are you struck dumb?
You want to take a stab at it, or I'm happy to tell you what it is.
Go for it.
That is a Cisco 6509 Ethernet switch behind all those Cat 5 cables there.
On the left or the right?
Well, the left is a patch panel.
Okay.
And then the cable management, I love it. It goes into an Ethernet switch, which little trivia, we had one of those running up until last year. That was a good Ethernet switch from Cisco back in the day. So
Cool.
Yeah, that's what that is, and a bunch of fiber patch panels at the top. So, yeah, that's what I find most interesting is you see the blue cable that comes in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Look how nice that is on the backside.
All bundled up, yeah.
Usually, what you have is when you do a cable plant, the installers will install a really nice structured cable plant, and then us IT nerds, we do the white side, and that's what it ends up looking like, a rat's nest of cables.
Is that day 2? Is it day 400? Does that happen over time?
You know, when you're in the data center business, you can actually, if you've got a 12 or 24-inch raised floor, you can dig down like digging through rings in a tree and go down to the very bottom and pull out the oldest tech, and it just lays on top of each other. So this is probably, I don't know, I commend, this is probably a good 6 months worth of work here putting that mess together.
Well, we appreciate David Asp, one of our great listeners and people who give us feedback and things like that, for sharing this.
Well, the good news here is once you get it wired, no one ever touches it. I mean, it's not getting rewired. So, yeah.
I agree, John, because actually that came out of the Catalyst line. I think that was actually acquired by Cisco. That was a really good switch. So, yes, Kim, I am that big a nerd.
All right.
Duh.
So we are moving on to T-Mobile and Metronet, and we're not going to spend a ton of time here. I want to make sure we have lots of stuff for Casey to jump in on. Casey, being a very good lawyer, is someone who is going to speak up when he's very knowledgeable, and then be reluctant to jump in on anything else, is my guess.
Unlike the rest of us who keep talking even if we don't know about it.
T-Mobile is inked. I don't know, is this a rumor? Is this verifiable? How is it something that is basically done?
Oh, no, it's officially announced. It's officially announced, but they have to get regulatory approval. So, yeah.
So this is where Blair Levin would point out that people like me can be hoisted on our own petard. So T-Mobile, obviously a very large wireless company. Metronet is a rapidly growing, largish fiber company. Many of us have insisted for years that wireless and fiber are complementary and not substitutes. And so therefore there's a question of whether there is any kind of a monopoly concern about one of these companies merging together, when if they don't compete, what's the big deal? So that's just one of the different angles that's a little bit uncomfortable for those of us that just knee jerk would like to see less concentration.
Well, we certainly have the Verizon example on the East Coast. I mean, they and Comcast own the markets, and so you do get that problem there. So, yeah.
But in general, this is something that, Doug, you were like, this has the ability to have major waves because T-Mobile has so much money and Metronet can build fast, is my impression.
In the first quarter, I looked it up, and for the 12 months before that first quarter, T-Mobile had bought $11 billion of their own stock back. Plus, they've been making these large investments. This company has a lot of cash, and so if they put it all into fiber acquisitions, they could grow very big, very fast. They also bought a company, Lumos, not too long ago. So they're in the acquisition business. I already saw an article that came out that lists 10 more companies they could look at buying. I mean, it's all the mid-sized guys. So they could become a really major player fast. They've already added almost 6 million FWA cellular customers on too in the last 2 years. So
do we think, what do we think their play is though, Doug? What do we think their play is long-term for this?
I think they're into cash generation, which is what ISPs are. ISPs are cash cows. They're not return machines. They're cash cows, and they're going to generate a lot of money out of this. They said that they're going to grow Metronet from 2 million to 6.5 million customers. Now they have to do it, but that's their goal, is to just roll all of its profits back into growing. So the interesting news is there's a company with 2 million customers that no one knew had 2 million customers.
Metronet, that's 2 million customers.
Yeah, because they've never said a word about how big they are. I mean, it was absolutely
was it
impossible.
2 million customers or 2 million passings?
Well, I don't know because I see it both ways.
Yeah, that's the thing I saw both ways too.
Yeah, it's really hard to read. But even if it's 2 million passings, I don't think anybody knew they were that big.
Yeah.
Now they also grew some by acquisition. They've been buying little guys up, but
we talked about something along these lines, I want to say 6-8 months ago, and the impression I got from y'all that know stuff, Kim and Doug in this case particularly was, T-Mobile changes their strategy every 9 to 12 months. So who knows?
They do. And over the past 10 years, they have started major new ventures, and then 2 years later just said, nah, that's not going to work. And they stopped on a dime. Yeah. They're pretty famous for that, but this is a hands-off purchase. They're going to purchase it and then just let it go. I think they might even keep the MetroNet name brand. So I'm not so sure that this is a branding bundling thing. So,
Casey, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, they've been really active, obviously, over the last, I guess year or so now. I mean, it seems to me they're transitioning into being a fiber provider. I wouldn't be surprised if they change their name at some point. I mean, it's
T not mobile.
Yeah, right.
T-Mobile.
I don't know. But they're doing a lot in Florida. They got major additional, private equity funding for development. I think they're partnering with Tillman and some others. I'm wondering, they could play a really big role in this massive ISP roll up that we've all been kind of anticipating. We're seeing a lot of smaller providers, extend themselves, and T-Mobile seems to be kind of waiting in the wings and being opportunistic, and is making a lot of plays. So it's really interesting. I kind of agree with Doug. I think they're looking at it for cash right now, and then also, by the way, in support of their wireless provision at the same time. So it makes a lot of sense, at least from my perspective, what they're doing. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
well, it also makes sense. It makes sense because the cellular industry is not growing. I mean, all they do is steal customers from each other. So if they need growth, this is one of their only ways to get it. So,
But I think by growing this fast, it could hurt them, right? Because I think that what has made T-Mobile powerful up until this point in the fiber industry is them being able to be agile. And when they do all these acquisitions, it's going to be a little more cumbersome, which I actually think can harm them down the road, because the big incumbents are great, but one of their downfalls is not being able to maneuver and make quick changes like this, which I think T-Mobile might be getting into with some of these big acquisitions as well.
to make that point even better, just a couple months ago, they got accused of remember, they gave people prices for life and they changed their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very big carrier behavior. Yeah. Are you sure that wasn't Comcast?
I'm curious about the open access relevance here, in that T-Mobile had long been someone that I've been hoping would help make open access more possible, because they'd be willing to jump on open access networks. It appears that they're on Sci-Fi in at least one market. Kim's back and forth on it, looks like.
Well, I think the thing is about T-Mobile and all of these carriers, I was actually just having this conversation earlier. These big carriers, unless they are like in the what I wouldn't call open access, they're never going to jump on a UTOPIA open access network, because there's not enough passings to make the business case of what they would have to change internally to make it work. If they're doing something where it's open access, where they're just leasing the fiber from somebody and they're the only tenant, I think that absolutely T-Mobile is going to go onto those networks, but I don't think they're going to go onto a very competitive 20 ISP open access network. I just don't think you're going to see it happen.
But if there was going to be an LA network that passed 500,000 subs, you think they'd be?
Yeah, I think if you have to have more passings, like the UTOPIA or somebody else with less than 200,000 passings, it doesn't make it worth it. But somebody where you might have 1 million passings or 500,000 passings, I think they could make the business case of why it makes sense to change some of the internal processes for that kind of numbers.
Okay, before we jump into the Fifth Circuit, I did want to know, I also just saw something about Ziply shareholders wanting an exit or something like that. I don't pay that much attention to those sorts of things, and I'm just curious if this is the beginning of the roll up and consolidation.
I've been predicting it all year. I think by next year it'll be a zoo. Yep. So.
All right.
But do you think it's just Ziply, or do you think it's everybody, like Doug, on that front?
There's still something like $1 trillion of venture capital that hasn't found anything to do with their money. I think and they were going to come in and thought they were going to build BEAD, and then they realized they're not going to build BEAD. So I think they're going to have to buy something or pull out of this sector. So they're going to do. So if they stay in the sector, acquisition is the only way to use their money. So, yeah.
Travis, any thoughts before we run out of this one?
No. I mean, I guess maybe I do. Maybe the input that I've seen is I think isn't T-Mobile running like on Intrepid's network, Sci-Fi's network, and I think it's an interesting way for them to finance these kind of networks and get them built. The bigger question is going to be, and Doug, maybe you remember when or maybe have some history of like when they rolled up like the paging networks and the cell networks and the cable networks.
Right.
You basically get a sense that this is just that same recipe happening again.
Oh, that's all it's going to be. When we say acquisition, it's going to be roll-ups. We're going to make a couple more giant carriers is what's going to happen. Yep. So, yep.
So can we make a bet about whether USI Fiber gets rolled up or not?
Well, then what would I do all day?
More multimedia with me. We'll just we'll have the Travis and Chris's version of CNN.
Yeah, remember I'm unemployable. I can't have a job, so this is all I know how to do. So
a better bet. When do we think Utopia is going to roll up? So.
Yeah.
Oh, I was actually, some people are asking me about that, and I'm like, they don't let me make the decisions if Utopia is going to get rolled up or not. But yeah, I think you're going to see some roll-ups. But I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be 2 or big carriers. Doug, do you think it's going to be 1 or 2 big carriers, or do you think it's going to be like 15 new carriers that you see?
I mean, the article I just read the other day talked about some really large companies or targets for T-Mobile to roll up. I mean, if they even bought half of that list, they would be as big as Comcast. So it could be monsters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you'll have it's mid-sized carriers too, doing it for the smaller guys. It's fish in a pond, right? I mean,
right.
Well,
Doug,
how many ISPs, kind of like tier 2, tier 3, are out there? Fiber ISPs. Are there many of them? With any
folks like you? Oh, no. When you start talking significant customers, the list gets small very, very fast. Yeah. I mean,
and then how many of them have networks worth buying versus the ones that have just been built to flip?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if you have a couple 100,000 passings, is there a lot of those out there? I have no idea. So
there's not a lot of them, though. You can count them probably on 3.5 hands. How's that?
Okay.
The last thing, I mean, I don't want to spend any more time on Metronet, but I did want to note that one of the first things that came up when we have talked about Metronet in the past is what led me from being someone who praised them in the first year or two that they were out there to being someone that was deeply dubious and annoyed by them, which was talking to cities predominantly in the Midwest where Metronet came in and said, we're going to build 40% of your city or 60% of your city or 75% of your city, but we are not going to build all your city because we don't want to deal with the areas where we're not going to make as much money. And now, yes, 5% of that is the richest area of town, but 20% of that or 40% of that is the lowest income area of town that would be left behind. Not every town, like they're building every last home in Rochester, I think, but like there's a number of places where they just came in from the start and they were like, we're not interested in serving everyone. And that just turns me off.
Right. And they're pretty famous for that. Yeah. So
Travis, did you want to react to that? It looked like you were screwing your face up with like Chris is just up on this high horse here.
Well, here's what I've seen is I've seen some of these new entrants. They come into a town and they basically put their flag down and it really chases other investors in. So I'm not sure that they ultimately won't cover all these towns. It's just you come in and you set your beachhead, and then nobody else will come in and overbuild you in the town at all. So it's actually a pretty decent strategy. Go and build 20% of the town, and then come back later and finish off the rest. So
no one's interested in your reasonableness, Travis. That's
yeah. So we'll have to see because an investor isn't going to come in. They're going to go and say, "Oh, Chris Mitchell already built out 25% of Glencoe, Minnesota. That's no longer now an option for us."
Nah, nobody's afraid of competing against Chris.
Well, I finally got Chris to laugh at a political joke.
What?
Well, he's not a Republican. He's not a Democrat. So I called him a max taxologist, and he actually smiled and laughed. So that
was hilarious. And I think Juan would appreciate that too.
Yes, he's never seen a tax he didn't absolutely love.
Oh yeah. No bearing on the truth, but I appreciate the caricature. We're going to move on to Universal Service Fund.
Speaking of taxes, right?
Right. So, this is the thing in which, Casey, I didn't tell you this, but I am desperate for someone to explain to me the difference between a fee and a tax, aside from it being whatever the judge doesn't want it to be, like, flipping a coin. But the short story is Universal Service Fund. There's been multiple lawsuits. We've talked about this. Congress told the Federal Communications Commission, figure out how to accomplish these goals serving these populations. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but there is a fund, and the Federal Communications Commission handed off administration of that to a different entity called USAC, the Universal Services Administration Company. And that company makes decisions as to how much to assess companies providing certain kinds of services to pay for other things that Congress told the FCC to do. And that whole setup has been being tested in the courts, and generally the courts have been like, yeah, it seems all right, and Congress gave enough leeway, but there's several different questions to be resolved, and the Fifth Circuit was like, no, we want to burn it all down. Casey, you can fill in.
No, I think that's really good. It was in the Fifth Circuit, so the Sixth Circuit and the 11th Circuit and the DC Circuit heard cases brought by an organization called Consumers Research, and it's an ideological organization. And all of those courts said, it's okay. We're okay with it. Universal service contribution is a fee, not a tax, as we and other courts have said for quite some time. Fifth Circuit hears it, and they said, no, you know what? We're going to ignore those other courts. We're going to ignore a lot of past decisions and precedent. And we feel like the universal service contribution is in fact a tax, and that the FCC is in violation of the Constitution because it amounts to an improper delegation of the taxing authority to the FCC without an, quote, an intelligible principle. There aren't enough guidelines there for how the FCC could administer this so-called tax. And it goes another layer, all according to the Fifth Circuit, because the FCC then improperly delegates the operation of this to USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company, who, according to the Fifth Circuit, is a private company that has an interest in increasing the tax. And on top of that, USAC delegates the determination of the amount of the tax to the private telecommunications carriers that are assessed it, because they have to report their revenues, right? And say how much they're going to be contributing. So the Fifth Circuit put all of that together in a extraordinarily long opinion, which is very dense as a legal matter. It's pretty tough to get through. And said,
if a lawyer saying it's tough to get through, I have problems for a regular person trying to get through this.
It is really tough. They went, full bore. They went down and talked about everything that was wrong with the unit before they even got to the legal parts of it. They went through and said, universal service is terrible, fraud, waste, abuse, et cetera, et cetera. Just, it was written, like I said, it's a very ideologically tinged decision in a lot of ways. So, pretty compelling dissent. I would say it was a 9-7 decision. It was the full Fifth Circuit en banc decision. The panel decision had already decided it was okay, and the whole Fifth Circuit heard it, and 9-7 decision decided it wasn't. So, they said the universal service contribution methodology is unconstitutional, and that's pretty much it. Now, they remanded it to the FCC. It doesn't really immediately change anything. So ISPs, it doesn't mean you have to stop, reporting universal service and all of that. It doesn't mean that the high cost fund is going to stop, and support through the high cost fund and E-rate or anything like that is going to stop immediately. It's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will almost certainly hear it. A decision, could be made, assuming they get, their writ of certiorari in, pretty soon and everything. That you're looking at middle of next year, June, at the end of the Supreme Court's, right before they go in recess in June. I've seen a number of predictions about what the Supreme Court could do with this. I think it's a bad decision in the Fifth Circuit as a legal matter. The opinion is, like I said, it doesn't really pay much attention to precedent. It's logically suspect.
The Supreme Court's going to love it.
Well, they might.
No, and
the Supreme Court, right? I mean,
right? No, and I mean, like
it's
one
an
of those
ideological decision, and this is an ideologically driven Supreme Court.
Right, and the thing is not that the Supreme Court makes all of its decisions along predictable ideology, and that's in some ways harder. It's less predictable. But before we take, I want to get comments from folks. But first, I want to know the same thing that always comes up, which is I feel like for people to understand the importance of this, basically every single company that serves rural customers gets support from the high cost fund, more or less. Like a lot of the electric cooperatives may not now, a lot of the WISPs may not, but the telephone companies, hundreds upon hundreds of companies, some are family owned, some of them are corporate, they have loans that are dependent on these revenues to pay them off for many years into the future. So this is a huge freaking deal if the courts were to invalidate it and force the FCC to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, the telecom industry just sent a letter or posted a letter, saying, to Congress, saying after this decision, this Fifth Circuit decision, that imploring Congress to do something, imploring Congress to take action, because what would undo this decision is if Congress effectively, ratified what the FCC's approach has been over the last several years. They could do that relatively simply, but you also at the same time have this policy debate that's been going on now for a couple of years about the problems with the Universal Service Fund and the skewed contributions. There's a Universal Service Working Group. And so, US Telecom and others are saying this is an opportunity for Congress to fix this and fix this issue. The big incumbents, the big carriers, huge providers don't want the Universal Service Fund to just go away. I can't think of very many people who want Universal Service Fund to go away, except for the Federalist Society, right? I mean, the burn it down people. And so it's a real problem. Congressional action is going to happen in some way or another. And then meanwhile, you have the Loper-Bright decision, which makes that very difficult too. So it's a challenging situation.
How does this play into USF reform? Because you have USF reform happening on one level, and then you have saying it's unconstitutional on the other. So where do you think this is going to meet at the end of the day?
This is, we have talked about this a little bit. And Casey, I'd love to get your comment if I just provide a little bit of background, which is the FCC can act on USF reform without further congressional authorization. However, if the FCC wants to increase this fee or tax to Facebook and Google and others, which is broadly popular, then Congress would have to act. And so there's a question of if there's going to be something that touches USF, then Congress will have to decide the scope of it. Does it just want to basically say the FCC can do what it's doing, or does it want to provide additional different direction for allowing for greater building the base of contributions and things like that? So Casey, and then Doug after that.
No, that's a pretty good synopsis, and this the Loper-Bright decision, a few weeks ago invalidating Chevron made it much more difficult for the FCC and Congress, for that matter, to effectively reform universal service. If Congress is going to reform the Universal Service Fund, then under Loper-Bright, they need to be really detailed in the statute about how to do it. The FCC is very limited, in my opinion, now about what they can do to effectively reform it, because they'll get sued based on the Loper-Bright decision. So you have this need for reform, and now you have a circuit court decision saying the whole thing is invalid. And so, it's a really hard situation.
Okay, I do have one last legal beagle question for you. Supreme Court says we're not going to accept it. We're just going to let the Fifth Circuit decision stand. Can a different circuit be like, you know what, we overrule the Fifth Circuit? How?
Not at that
or
point.
can the FCC just not tax within the Fifth Circuit jurisdiction? How does this all come together?
If there's a split in the circuits like this, generally nothing's going to happen. It'll be stayed until they get it to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court will almost
certainly take it then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a few comments on it. One is, first off, electric co-ops mostly all get it. This is what pays RDOF. Can you imagine?
Right. I think
Can you
the
imagine?
electric co-ops, like only like a quarter of them have RDOF, but
Yes.
But still, a lot of them do, and so if next year they invalidated this, folks wouldn't get their last 5 years of RDOF payments. Can you imagine? I mean, all the bank loans based upon that and everything. I mean, this has the big companies are in favor of it because they all collect a lot. This is used to pay broadband bills at schools. All the big carriers get a lot of that money because I mean, it goes to Comcast and Charter and AT&T and everybody else, right? Yeah, nobody wants to see this go away. So, you know, it pays for rural health connections. I mean, it pays for the stuff that's expensive. Travis has his hand up.
we found one person who wants it to go away. I mean, I don't find it elegant. I'm probably gonna pre-agree with Travis here.
Whoa, you
I
agree
knew
with
you guys
Travis
were
on
all gonna
something?
Well, I knew you were all going to be in favor of this, so I figured I would play the other side of the coin. Have you ever managed a USF, you know, being a USF provider? Surprise, surprise, it's an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it's
Agreed.
a paperwork nightmare. Yes.
Absolutely agree.
Typical government program, we call it the leaky bucket over here, or my buddy Jay and I do, where, I mean, there has been, since 2018, I think there's been 18 different rate increases or charges and fees, and trying to understand how it works. And then when you're trying to pay fees on circuits that go, you know, interstate fees, how does all that work? I mean, you need to have a full-time staff. So this really benefits the big guys, Mr. Mitchell, but for the little guys, this is a terrible program, the way that it's executed.
It benefits lawyers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go,
yeah.
I'll go further than that, Travis. Like,
And the lawyer said that. And the lawyer said it benefits the lawyers.
Yeah,
It's shocking.
It needs to be fixed. It needs to be simplified,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Well,
it was designed for
yeah.
phone service. It was
I mean-
not designed for broadband. It's pigeonholing terms that were used in the Telecom Act of '96, which was terrible timing to have a Telecom Act, into, you know, there needs to be, you know, omnibus telecom reform legislation of some kind. That's not going to happen as far as I can tell. So the reason, I mean, Travis is totally right. It's a nuanced, difficult program to deal with. It's expensive to comply with. It's hard to get right. You know, it's no good, but it's necessary.
It's super opaque for those of us who are trying to figure out, like, what are schools paying, and we're trying to figure out just how much the taxpayers or the fee payers were getting ripped off by incumbents who were just way overcharging, because the incentive mismatch for E-rate is awful, and it's frustrating, frankly. Like, it's not a good program from the point of view of the ultimate way to benefit something, to be fiscally responsible, as well as to be transparent, and for small companies to operate and things like that. And yet it is better than the alternative of not having one, I think. And so, you know, to some extent, if this was a way to force USAC and the FCC, and I should say specifically the FCC, to take its job seriously, that would be great. But I'm afraid that's not necessarily, you know, I just feel like the burn it all down people are often surprised at just how much happens when you burn it all down, and just how you have not taken notice of the benefits of a deeply flawed system.
Hold on, did we agree on something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're mostly in agreement on it, that, like, we should be doing better.
All right. I'm really mad they're getting rid of it. Then I'm going the other side. Then,
I'm in the middle. Remember last week I said we should stop paying for school broadband connections, and boy, did Gigi ever give me a look. Remember?
Yeah, and I mean, like, so
it's the worst.
Well,
Chris might, right? This might be Chris's, you know, educated version. This will be my uneducated version. It de-incentivizes schools from ever looking for a deal. They don't care. They're like, oh, it's E-rate. They don't care what it costs.
That is the case in many districts, and it's frustrating. So I would agree with that. On the other hand, E-rate is also paying for you know, the Wi-Fi in the schools and things like that aren't as long term and might need service contracts. So I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush in this case. There
are abuses. There are definitely abuses,
right,
but there's also lots of benefit. It's just one of those things you love to hate.
So let's do it. Let's do what Jay said. Just make it easy, make it a fixed rate, and we don't have to chase around every week what the new version is and how to pay it.
Well, the simplest approach it seems
What
to me
is
would be to
is
assess
Jay
against
trying?
broad-
Is Jay trying to put Casey out of work here? I don't know.
Yeah.
what's going on.
Well,
So,
it's the inferior versions of Casey that are under threat, not Casey.
but I do have a question on this. Do you think the ILECs who are dependent on this USF funding are like shaking? Like, well, because what if it goes away, right? What's happening to some of those carriers who do get it? And a lot of rural carriers do get USF funds. Do we hear any of what they are saying about this? Because I haven't heard anything.
They
yet,
want
but-
Congress to do something. They want Congress to,
Yes.
to reform the FCC and bring in the content providers, bring in the Netflixes, and quote, pay their fair share. They say, well, if you reform universal service by bringing broadband into it, then you're just causing consumers to pay that additional fee. Consumers are going to pay the fee anyway. Look, if you put it on Netflix or whomever, then your Netflix bill is going to go up.
Right.
So
I think the argument is so Casey is so mad he's not going to listen to the rest of the show. I think I do want to say that I feel like the argument of increasing it on Netflix and others is in part that at that point you're talking about an increase on a monthly household bill across everything by $1 or $2 rather than potentially 3 or 4 in other ways. And I've talked about this in community broadband bits. If you look back at the show with Mike Romano, we went through a lot of this in community broadband bits for different scenarios. So and I would say that one of the things that I would urge Congress to do, since I'm so influential with those folks, the 535 people hanging on my every word, would be, if you're going to assess it, let's assess 3 big guys or 4 big guys. Don't assess, all these small companies and force them to pay in. Set the limit very high, so we're hitting Amazon, Facebook, Google, maybe Netflix, Apple, Microsoft, perhaps. But beyond that, nothing. Just keep it simple and keep it high level.
Yeah, because where do you break it off for content providers? It could go way down the hill.
Revenues that are very high.
The content providers are already paying though.
Right, but the question, so Netflix and Amazon are not paying into USF today.
Sure, they are.
No, they're not.
They buy transport circuits to bring their content around the nation, and you have USF attached to that.
But not paying for USF though. They're not they're paying.
So they're paying for some services. I think the argument is, and I if I had to guess, I mean, you can tell me I'm wrong. It would be a first time, obviously, but over time they're doing less and less of leasing of those sorts of transport circuits and building their own fiber. Most of their traffic has to be going over their own networks internally now before it hits the others.
No, they don't. They do not have nationwide. They do not have nationwide.
They buy
guys.
Circuits.
We just heard Chris Mitchell say he was wrong for the first time just now.
My confidence is shattered. I don't know what to do. Can someone else end the show for me?
And I would, argue they're paying more all the time because they're buying more and more and more circuits to bring because the usage of their content is going up and up and up.
I'm so confused. I feel like Facebook is building networks freaking everywhere, and Amazon they're all building.
They're building. They are putting some money into underwater cables to get to Europe, but they're not building much in the U.S. No.
Facebook was just building through West Virginia. I mean, just 7 years ago, and they did this whole thing about how they were going to bundle the dark fiber and make it available to ISPs and stuff like that.
But they didn't do it.
Arcadian Infracom is out there building for these data centers from data center to data center. Lumen is okay. Well, here I am. So if Lumen's building Lumen's stock price just went up again. I don't know if anyone else is paying attention. I don't know. I was just coincidence.
Hey! But I just want to make. We have to ask a question before you go any further. Are you upside down on Lumen still, or are you still doing pretty well?
I think I bought it at 5. They're doing a bunch of data center stuff now, right? And now, so are those new links that if Lumen is building, are those all assessed under USF?
Yes,
sure.
Because they're interstate traffic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you would probably be. I bet you'd be surprised how much Google.
Jay, hold on. Here we go. Is Jay right here? Because this is what I was thinking.
Dark fiber is, but
that's what they're getting, right? Who's buying a lit circuit from Lumen?
No,
Chris,
they're
they just
getting.
All right, hold on. Casey knows actually. Casey said
Lumen
not necessarily, and that is lawyer for almost certainly not.
No, I don't think they're getting as much dark fiber. They're getting transport, to a large extent with the data center circuits in middle mile.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way,
It's just
Lumen
that
hit
easy,
$3.08 a few minutes ago. $3.08.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, let's all be clear. My dabbling in the stock market is I put in like $500 and I'm sweating it because that's my budget. It's
So
nothing
what
my
we've
wife's
learned,
giving.
what we've learned is we do not take Chris Mitchell's stock advice here on Connect This.
Yeah, so
okay.
there is a tremendous amount of USF fees being paid by the content providers.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess my position is they could pay more.
Surprise, Max
We'll see.
Taxologist.
If Juan's watching in about 10 seconds, we'll see a comment in the chat about me being a max taxologist.
You are a Max Taxologist, yes.
All right. For the sake of the show, we're moving on. Let's see. Doug, also read Doug's post. I'll put that in the chat. I have it handy here. Doug wrote something about this that I thought was really good. And says that he suspects that if the FCC decided to directly administer the fund, the people challenging it would still say that it's unconstitutional for the FCC to be doing it. This is not something that's going to be. There's some people who are going to be raising these suits forever, and the question is whether the courts have the good sense to toss it out or not.
There's been at least 10 of these suits over the years. I mean, they come up every so often. Yeah.
So North Kansas City, I remember when they did this, that's probably like 10 years ago. North Kansas City had built a municipal fiber network. It's a town of like 5,000-6,000 people, I want to say. And they built a municipal fiber network with capital from funds that they had from a gambling operation that the city got a substantial stake in. So they built this network without having to borrow any funds, and they were running it, and they had some typical hiccups here and there. And then they partnered with a data warehousing company, and that company wanted more eyeballs to go with the other traffic to balance it out. And they were like, free internet service for everyone. And I was like, cool, let's watch this. Well, there's an article here about it and says that it's pretty freaking great. Everyone has free internet service that wants it in that town.
Yeah, and I was actually a consultant on that 15 years ago. Again, this city gets a huge amount of money every year from two riverboat casinos parked in their tiny little town of 5,000 or 6,000 people, and they have to spend it on infrastructure. And so, I mean, they have the most amazing municipal gym you've ever seen. I mean, there's no gym like that in a big city. It's amazing. It's just like everyone has their own station at the gym, right?
So Travis, if I go all Maverick on the Mississippi and start a gambling operation, would you offer service for free?
Well, if you're going to pay, sure. Because remember, nothing's free. Everybody takes their paychecks down to the casino and loses, and then so how much do you think their internet really costs? $300-400 a month per home. You know, after all the
what cost would you think would be there?
Well, I mean, after they lose all their money at the casino, I mean, what did that cost them?
Oh,
and in return, they get free internet. That's a good deal. I'll do that all day.
I think the support is paid for. The question in the chat is probably paid for with revenues from the riverboats. I'm not sure if the data company pays for it or not.
It's mostly a town of giant warehouses. I mean, so there's 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 people, and there's mile after mile of these abandoned warehouses, which nowadays are starting to get things in them. And so they're charging those folks for it. They don't get free broadband. So,
yeah. Anyway, it was kind of cool. And it was one of the things was just that marriage of what I forgot the term for it. I've just been going over with transport, and Jay's gonna probably laughing, but you got the eyeball networks and the content networks. Is that the alternative? You want to try and balance those out? You know what I'm talking about?
What?
Crickets? Do we not have the cricket sound apparently?
Oh, are you talking, Chris Mitchell? We don't understand.
My confidence is further shattered. There's further to go down, it turns out.
Your eyeballs.
Jason,
yes.
It is an interesting concept in that even without the riverboats, if they sold enough broadband into the warehouses, they could potentially give away free residential internet. So it's a model for towns who have some.
I mean, if you have a network and you're peering, right, then you want to have traffic going both ways. If most of your traffic is going one way, then you're at a disadvantage for peering contracts, right? And so this is the data center trying to balance itself out, is my understanding.
Yes.
A little bit, but those people don't generate nearly what a data center does. Yeah. So,
Well, it depends on what's in the data center, obviously.
yeah.
You know, all this AI buzz is actually relatively low bandwidth. So,
Right.
Okay. People love fiber. They like municipal broadband, and they love Google too. Anyone take a look at this?
And they love Connect This.
Yes, obviously. Goes without saying. So I'm curious, Casey, I'll go to you first on this because you always put these stories together. We get like one of these every 4 or 5 months, it feels like. Do you remember like 6-7 years ago when the cable companies were like, nobody cares about fiber. It's all just bloat. It's all small.
Oh, yeah.
People like fiber more than cable.
Yes, they do. And what was that? I don't think it was Billy Ray, but it was. Remember the movie somebody made, Nick, with the car and the bike, functionally similar.
Yeah, that was
functionally the same. Who was that?
That was Slick Sam in Lafayette, Louisiana, in 2005.
Yeah. So people want the race car, right?
So are we really just talking about this, Chris, that people like fiber over cable right now? Is this our discussion on Connect This? This is where we've gone?
So, okay, fiber broadband services scored the highest with 69% saying they were completely or very satisfied, only 39% for cable. I find that legitimately interesting because cable's gotten a lot better. The mid-split for Comcast is terrific. Charter sucks, but like there's other cable companies that are probably doing an okay job. Like,
well, how much of that is from the service itself as opposed to, customer service and just you hate your cable company? Almost on principle.
I don't know. That's what I'm getting at.
I think Casey's absolutely right. I don't think it's about fiber versus cable. I think it's about how you treat the customer at the end of the day.
No, but I think people on AT&T fiber like it more than AT&T DSL, and Verizon the same thing. I think you'd find that broadly.
Yeah, but that's the same company within and a better product. If you offered them the exact same, like a Comcast 1 gig on cable and a Muni fiber on 1 gig, at the end of the day, it comes down to the experience. And I think a lot of people wanted just to be seen in this space now. They've spent years where the consumer have been treated like that they don't matter. And Muni and these smaller networks are doing a lot to make sure that the consumers matter. And I agree with Casey wholeheartedly on this. I don't think it's a fiber versus cable thing. I think that that's there, but I think it's more of a customer experience thing. And I would like to hear Travis's point of view on this, actually.
No one else
what he thought.
Well, you guys kind of had the same question I had. If Comcast sold fiber, would people all of a sudden
they do.
So is it the tech, or is it the 40 years of being treated like
well,
dirt?
It's hard to disassociate, but it's both. I mean, like, let's be clear, fiber has typical fiber network is going to have fewer points of failure, fewer outages and things like that, right? So there's that is right there. Doug?
Well, you guys have talked to me over the years. You know how many times Charter just lets me down 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, this doesn't happen. I mean, they just fade off. They do that. You could say they do have fast speeds now, but it's not the quality that you want. So, yeah.
But I think Juan makes a good point, though. If the prices go up on fiber and you see like a dramatic increase at $50 for cable to $100 for fiber, I don't think you see as much penetration in the fiber market that you do today.
And that's a great point because fiber is universally cheaper. That's a great point. So,
Casey?
Yeah.
Well, I think Rye raised this too. People hate, I think, cable TV service even more. And so they commingle the cable provider with the cable TV service, which goes up 5 to, how much of those rates going up over the last 5 or 10 years, right? With retransmission consent going through the roof. So, fiber providers are less video providers now, and people hate video providers.
Yeah, I mean, that, and Ryan just made an off-screen comment to me too. I'd be curious to dig into this and figure out the way to do this study is not to let people themselves choose if they have cable or fiber, because people inevitably will think they have satellite service from the fiber network. So I'd be curious how rigorous the study actually was before we get too much deeper. But I will note that Chattanooga crushed it with 92 support, basically with 92, with a score of 92. I think it's out of 100. Only one that was better was Greenlight Networks, was a 95. And then Google Fiber, GoNet Speed, and Sonic were high up. The worst was Viasat and HughesNet, not really surprising. I think that's also partially people are furious because they get locked into long-term contracts for bad service, so it amplifies it. But then CenturyLink's Lumen, Mediacom, and Altice and Comcast were all very low. Like I said, I think Comcast's Xfinity service on like a modern, in most places, can actually be pretty good. It's prices and other things that drive it down. But I'll say across town in St. Paul, you might find very different reactions for people, more or less reliable.
That's the other thing. Cable really does differ by neighborhood. People don't grasp that. Your neighborhood might be fairly good. There's parts of your city where it's really poor. So
yeah, I mean, I ran into this years ago when I was in an apartment building, small fourplex, and we would have these periodic Comcast outages, and it was really frustrating for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. I came home one day and there's a Comcast guy on the side of my building with a ladder, and he's up, right there with the customer premise equipment. And I was like, what's going on? He's like, we've been chasing this problem for months. And he was basically like, it's intermittent, and we scramble whenever the problem happens to try to figure out where it is. We finally traced it back, and it turned out that my building apparently was flaking out the entire network periodically.
It was actually
humidity or something.
It was actually you. So, yeah.
My electrical field. So that leads us right into Charter and Comcast lost more subs. Like a year ago, I feel like we were looking at reports from analysts and saying this fixed wireless thing, how many are they going to take? Is it going to be 1 year is what a number of people predicted. I thought that was reasonable, where people would have moved to fixed wireless, become disenchanted with the variability and other problems, and then potentially move back. Nobody seems to be moving back to cable, or at least if they are, it's offset by other people who are moving away from Comcast and Charter, who have both lost significant numbers of subscribers.
You know what I know about that number? Right when I saw those two headlines come out, I thought, now I really understand why the $1 million attack campaign's happening for Utopia, because they're going to come after anybody who challenges status quo. And I get that. I mean, if you've just lost between the two of them 250,000 subs in the last quarter, like, excuse my language, but damn straight I would do something to save my market share if I was them. I mean, I understand blood in the water, man.
And I think they're still losing more people to fiber than they are to the wireless guys. The wireless guys are still mostly picking up suburban and really rural folks. So I mean, there's a lot of fiber overbuilders eating their lunch. So,
Travis, any thoughts on that? Were you surprised at all?
Travis has taken every one of his customers away from the cable company. So
yeah, no, it's, we do see some people that, go back to wireless, but it's usually the low elderly people, financially challenged, or believe it or not, there is a segment of our society that does not sit on the internet all day long. I'm surprised too, but there are people out there that actually go outside and use parks and things, and they seem to be happy with it. But I wanted to say one thing. You know what?
Yeah, but they have free Wi-Fi in parks too now, Travis. I just wanted to let you know.
And there's also a huge percentage of our customer base who believe, they say, is your Wi-Fi better than the cable company's Wi-Fi? They don't even have a clue, fiber versus coax versus anything. They just call their internet Wi-Fi.
Yeah. They think everything is Wi-Fi, correct?
Yeah. Yes. So it's...
That would be my father, Travis. That would be my father. He's like, does this Wi-Fi... Yeah, he's like, does this little Siri thing work through Wi-Fi? I'm like, let's not even start there, Dad.
Well, it's my 10-year-old also. It's just Wi-Fi. It's just there.
Yeah.
I assume that at some point you're going to flip out on him, Casey, and sit him down, and he's going to get like a 3-hour lecture, and there's going to be a test at the end.
No, I tried. I tried to explain what I do. It didn't go well.
When I walk around with my son and I was thinking I would show this, but we're doing a little Pokemon Go here. Walk around with my son, and so he has a device that is like an old cell phone that he does not have access, so he hotspots off of me. And when I'm in a spot where my phone doesn't have good service, hard to believe with that 5G logo on the top. He starts walking around, and I'm like, dude, the problem is not your phone. Like, and I've explained it to him 4 or 5 times, and he does not. It's just magic.
It's magic. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Explain a phone to him one time.
We saw one. Oh, I just saw one in on a res up in Montana. I was like, that thing still works, I think.
Oh,
yeah. That led me into speaking of those people that aren't into the new tech, in talking to Billy Ray, back to where we started with Glasgow, he was talking about the number of customers they have who just really didn't want to change. And he was talking about how the benefit of that local provider and knowing your customers. And he was talking about how they had some customers that they would know, they'd always have to go change the batteries in their remote, and they would roll a truck to help them out. Like people who really need help, or where they had taken the remote and the woman was so unable to see that they had customized the remote with tape to basically like help her to only hit the right buttons and not mess things up. And it just brought back to me some of the value of local service when in dealing with towns. I just feel like, for those of us who are obviously the cool kids in school who had all of the friends, and we forget how many other people are out there who are just living normal lives, who don't get the tech and everything else. There's a lot more of them than we realize. Travis has to deal with them all, I'm guessing.
Well, we rolled a truck one time to plug in an Ethernet cable. I remember that. The person was too afraid. Said they were not tech savvy, and I'm like, you just push. But
I mean, Travis, I might can beat that. We rolled probably like 6 trucks to try to teach this lady that she has to stop moving the ONT plug to a timed outlet because it would go out every single day at the same time, and we couldn't convince her of this.
Guy lit me up one day about how our internet was so crap, and he had his switch was on a light switch. So every time they go to bed, turn it off. But you'd be surprised how long it takes to figure that out.
Yeah.
It's
obvious when you
figure it out, but not at the time.
It takes one viewing of Christmas Vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we had a customer who kept going out because there was like a hole in the fiber and ice would get in and then it would melt and then it would freeze and then it would melt and it would go down and up. And we couldn't figure it out for the longest time. Travis, like, what the heck is going on? It takes a lot for some of those little ones.
Some of these people are unbelievable. Somebody's dog was chewing on the cables, the fiber cables, and would disconnect their connection. We'd rerun another drop. The dog would do it again. Somehow it's our fault that her damn dog was eating the fiber cable. So
no, it's our fault.
This show,
We've come to that point in the show, folks.
I believe we have. I believe we're there now. Yeah.
Any last topics? I want to ask Casey. You've put so many different news lists together. Anything else that you think is notable we should wrap up on?
I think you covered the gamut.
All the way from the Fifth Circuit to the dogs eating the fiber.
Well,
Yes.
and let's not forget the Reuben.
The Reuben.
Yeah.
The next show we have to talk.
We don't want to talk about that. Stop, Travis. We don't want to
have the mug. So
yep.
Yes.
We don't want to talk about this. Reuben, we need to talk. We need to have a chat.
I love it.
Next show we get to talk about how Starlink is killing the ozone layer. So
yeah, no, I mean it's a
real thing.
It is a real thing, and
next show.
Actually, no, I think we talked about it. I think you were Doug. You had the dental thing, and we did talk about it a bit. I think. Kim? Do you remember that at all? Do you remember past shows?
No, I don't even. Dude, I've been at a fiber conference since Saturday. I don't remember anything at this point.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you all spending the afternoon with us, and we're going to be trying to figure out when we're going to be back. So I think it might be back on a Friday again. But it's a little bit dicey until we get back into September, because I'm really trying to spend some time not working over the summer. So the rest of you all can do the work for me. I appreciate that.
Hang on, Chris. It's episode 100. I'm sure you got something exciting.
Something special.
Is this the 100th episode? I had no idea. Is it really?
I mean, I was waiting till 128 because I'm a legit geek. I don't know.
No, this is 99. Chris has got something big for next time.
Next episode.
Ooh. Ooh, okay.
Well, technically, this might be the 100th episode. I don't know if we started at 0 or not. But yeah.
What a nerd.
I have no idea what we're doing. Here's the thing. People would love to, if people want to send me email and let me know what we should be doing for the 100th episode. I don't know, like a bucket of cold water on Travis's head, any sort of like cheap gimmicks. Can
we go back and like on our 100th episode and talk about which one was our favorite episode personally through all of this? Because mine, I will already tell you, is when my face got frozen for a good, like a whole episode.
For the whole episode. Yeah, it was almost the whole episode.
Oh, I know what my favorite one was. So yeah.
My favorite one is anyone in which I get to spend time with y'all.
Oh, wow.
And yes, Casey, this is as good as it gets. Sorry, buddy. We
This is my
appreciate taking
favorite
an hour out of your day. This is it. Yeah. I hope
My
Chris
favorite-
your expectations very high. So
My favorite one was the one where Travis did not wear a hat.
that, you know what? I should wear a blue T-shirt next time or be different. That's 199 T-shirts. Kim saw my closet, so she can attest. Yeah.
All right. Well, we yes, Juan was there. We started. Carl Bodie and Kat Blake were on the very first show. And I think it was 0. I tend to do that because I'm that big of a geek. So, or at least I pretend to be. I have respect for it, let's say. So, all right. Those of you who made it this far, I hope that your lives improve for the rest of us. It's been a wonderful time talking. Casey, thank you so much for joining us for the entire show.
Oh, glad. Thanks for having me.
And for the rest of you, we'll see you next time. It's been another fun episode of Connect This.